There we go. And they also said everyone's running 10 minutes late anyway, so that's 10 minutes of it gone, I think, straight off.
The session will start like 10 minutes late.
Yeah, see, so. I'll go.
It's up. Welcome everybody, and to this session. In this session we're going to have 4 presenters, and they're going to cover topics from different areas of open educational resources. The first one will talk about how we use OERs to support the transition of flexible learners. And the second one will talk about last mentioned Wikipedia projects, and the third one will be about collaborative development of OER tools. And the last one is about open data. Okay, and let's welcome our first speaker. Joyce first.
Good morning, everyone. My name is James Brunton. I work in Dublin City University in Ireland. I'm here to talk about a project that's been ongoing for just over a year, well, a year and a half probably, the Student Success Toolbox project. This project is a funded project. It has funding from Ireland's National Forum for the Enhancement of Teaching and Learning in Higher Education, and it has 4 project partners: ourselves, DCU, especially the National Institute for Digital Learning within DCU, Maynooth University, Dundalk Institute of Technology and Sligo Institute of Technology. This project has been focused on creating digital tools that can be used by institutions or program teams or service units to facilitate successful transition to higher education for flexible learners. In our project, we're using a broad definition of a flexible learner as any adult learner going into undergraduate study, whether that's part-time or online, off-campus, distance education. The scope of this project is we're focused on supporting flexible learners through key transitions in the early stages of the study life cycle. So thinking about study, making choices, the registration process, the first few weeks of the year, and especially that gap between maybe registering and the start of the year. That's the scope, that's as far as we're going with this project. In terms of just a very brief overview of what the project did, our whole goal was to try and enhance success for flexible learners or prospective flexible learners transitioning into higher education. What we did was develop 8 digital readiness tools which are being produced as OERs with CC BY licenses that we want to share with the sector. We want to share them with other people so that other people can kind of customize them for themselves and use them in their institutions. How we did this was we undertook a synthesis of the literature. We looked at the literature that was out there in this space. We also looked at the websites of some leading sort of flexible learner institutions to see what were people already using. And to make a long story short, we then used that as the basis to choose what tools we were going to make in our project. As we made them, we had academics, involved in the project, giving feedback on the tools as they were being developed in storyboard and prototype, but we also brought in existing flexible learners to get their feedback on the process, to try and get their thoughts on, do they think this is useful, do they think this is easy to use, and then if they were spotting problems or giving criticisms, we tried to, we fixed those problems as we went through the process. We have a project website, studentsuccess.ie. There you get information about the project, some publications from the project, and also the toolbox page. We have a Twitter account also. The toolbox page, you can actually view. You can view the tools. You can sort of go through the tools yourself and see what the tools do. So we built the tools on the basis of some key principles. What we saw was the most important things that we needed to try and imbue the tools with. And I'll just use that to give some examples, show you some of the tools themselves without going through all of them. So the first one was we were very focused on trying to encourage the development of self-regulation in these sort of prospective or new flexible learners. When you boil it down to like saying one thing, what's the one thing you want to do for these people? You want to help them create a set of realistic expectations about what flexible learning is going to be about. Now this particular tool is the How Much Work Is It tool. It's basically kind of a life domain time calculator you can use to say, right, these are the typical parts of a person's life. How much time do you spend in a week doing that? And you can do it either by day, or you can do it by week, or you can break it down by how much sleep do I get every day, because maybe at the weekends you get slightly more sleep. But time management is one of the biggest problems that flexible learners have. So this tool is trying to get them to look at their lives realistically and say, if you've only got 2 hours spare at the end of the week, you're not going to get a lot of study done. You're going to have to figure out some way of reducing that time. The next one was personalization. Where possible, we tried to put into the tools some element of personalization where the tool would kind of take some feedback from you straight away and then augment the route that you go through the tool to give you some more specific feedback. So this is my first assignment tool, trying to give people a kind of let people follow a narrative of what it's like to produce an assignment in higher education. And that's kind of a sneaky way of trying to show people ideas about what are study skills, why might the library be important when you're studying, why might asking your tutor questions be important. But at the very start, you get to kind of chart where are you now, and then move on from there with a specific narrative. We thought it was very important as well not to just, a lot of existing tools just use institution speak. And I think that can be alienating for prospective flexible learners. So where possible, you still have to give kind of neutral messages, kind of the key message you're actually trying to put out there. But we always try to use sort of quotes from real flexible learners or quotes that could be from real flexible learners to try and reinforce the same messages. So here, this is my computer skills again, trying to key up why might computer skills and digital literacies be important for a flexible learner going into higher education. So there's kind of student quotes and then the same kind of information reinforced with just straightforward messages. And also, let's say if we go back to the how much work is it calculator, at the end, depending on how much time you've had left over, you get some advice about what that might mean for you. And again, that advice is given in a kind of a neutral message, but then reinforced with kind of student quotes, flexible learner quotes. So always trying to put things in the world of the learner, in the words of learners. We tried to create the tools so that they would ideally be delivered at the point of need where they're required. So as the students are going through these very early parts of the study life cycle, you know, if they're thinking about study, if they're at the point where they're making choices, that is ideally where you want them to be really reflecting realistically on their readiness. So we have a self-readiness quiz. You know, we have the time, the how much work is it, that kind of life domain time calculator. We've designed those to ideally drop and be used at that point. And also not to give them too much information at an early point. So again, if they are made a choice and they're starting to get ready, you know, my first assignment would be a very good tool to use at that point, but we're not trying to teach them study skills. If they come out of that tool knowing that study skills exist, then we'd be happy. They can learn study skills once they actually get to orientation or beyond orientation. The next thing was customization. We didn't make these tools to use. Most of these tools, we can't immediately even use them ourselves. We made them so that they are ready to be customized by anyone. So some of the tools have resource sections, but we haven't filled those out because a particular institution might have a particular set of resources that they want to direct people to. So we've left those blank. We've left spaces in the footers where people can put in their institutional logos. Now, for many of the tools, we worked with a Dublin-based company, Fluid Rock, web developers, to produce these. So we have, I'm a mere psychologist, so I don't speak this kind of language, but there is a GitHub site that people now can go to, and that's the address. The tools are just there, the code is there, along with information and guidelines from the web developers as to how another web developer can augment them, customize them, change them, take things in, put things in, take things out. We're also producing a kind of a guide to the tools that's going to be that's still in draft until we do some dissemination workshops in the next month. But that's going to be more on the side of what do we envision the tools being used for, when do we envision them being used for. If you wanted to use them at a different stage of the study life cycle, what kind of changes do we think you'd have to make, and also encompassing that within some sort of key overarching messages about what you have to do to successfully support these kinds of transitions. Ourselves, one of the ways, it is one of the tools, but one of the ways that we are immediately customizing these tools is that we're taking a number of the tools and putting them together along with other content to create a 5-week sort of pre-induction socialization MOOC, the Get Ready for Success MOOC, which we're hoping to run for the first time probably the end of July. We're creating that MOOC on a new Moodle-based platform, Academy, and we're going to be launching that in DCU in the next month or two. But to do that, we are having to now go through our own first process of taking these tools and finishing them off for use within this MOOC. Just a plug, the project is up for an award at the IMS Global Learning Impact Awards in Texas at the end of May. So if anyone, on the basis of what you've heard in the last 10 minutes, wants to go to that link, which I will tweet out when I sit down, and wants to sort of rate the toolbox highly, I might get a nice award for the project. So just before I finish, the other thing I want to do is, if anyone likes these tools, are going to use the tools, please get in contact with us. We're going to be customizing the tools. We're going to be following up with small-scale research projects around each of the tools, because that's what the literature says. We're missing, good information, good follow-up, especially in lots of different sites about lots of different tools, about how useful these tools are. So we're going to try and be doing that work. Thank you very much.
Let's welcome our second speaker.
I'm trying to remove this laptop without destroying it. That may be too in order. Be moved. Oh, wait. That's not good. Start up. I really need my slides and my computer's taking a little bit of time, a little bit of extra time. Right. Yeah, give me a sec to make sure I have them. I've prepared slides rather than doing an online demo to make it really quick and to make it really technically easy, don't need internet connection.
USB stick if you want something.
Sorry?
I've got a USB stick if you want to like.
It's cool. It's just about to. Start up. We're very nearly there. So I'm Martin Poulter. I'm a Wikimedia in residence. I'm a Wikimedia project contributor. That's fine. I've come to this conference a few times before, and I usually go on about Wikipedia educational assignments. So that I don't seem like a broken record, here is something different. So, on the 25th of June last year, the US Supreme Court rendered its judgment in Obergefell versus Hodges, and this was the judgment that legalized same-sex marriage. And there's lots of celebration across social media, mainly by people putting this rainbow effect on their profile pictures. And nothing against people who do this, but it's kind of ephemeral. I want something more meaningful I can do with my time that Friday afternoon that celebrates what was learned. So a set of civil rights for one group of people in one country has been recognised. There are more battles. What can I do to promote learning from that? I'm a Wikipedia contributor, but the people who write about current events in Wikipedia are really good. And I knew as soon as the result was announced there'd be a pretty good Wikipedia article about it. There was. But I saw people sharing quotes from the text of the judgment. and people saying it was very beautifully written and powerfully written. So I could make that more accessible. It's available as a PDF from the Supreme Court website, but we know that official URLs change. A PDF's a very self-contained thing. But because it's the US government, there's no copyright restriction. So I could put it on Wikisource. Wikisource, whereas Wikipedia is the free encyclopedia, Wikisource is the free library. So Wikisource has hundreds of thousands of texts of different kinds. These can be reference books, biographies, poems, plays, or legal or constitutional documents. So I could make a Wikisource version of this. Now, I suspect even if you're an open culture advocate, you'd think the law, legal judgments, that's got to be, you don't hack that, you don't remix that, it's got to be no derivatives. But I do want to make a distinctive version of it. So I copied the text and set it out to Wikisource standards and give some context, give the Wikipedia article as a link, give some background as to what this case is and its significance. What else I can do is add links. So the judgment cites Cicero, Confucius, de Tocqueville about cultural ideas of marriage. And it mentions other cases, mentions Loving versus Virginia, which, if you know, is the case established interracial marriage legality. So if you know who Confucius and Cicero are, and if you know what Loving versus Virginia is, then that's the target audience for this article. But not everybody knows that. And just by the simple, amazing technology of web links, we can add context, so it's not just a self-contained thing that assumes you know all this background information, it becomes a web of knowledge linking. So, about Alex de Tocqueville, you link to the Wikisource profile, which tells you who he was when he wrote. Other people had already transcribed other relevant legislation and court judgments, so I could link to that to context, and that would give some context of what this is. I can also put the judgment in categories. So, because this is the same software platform, the same way of working as Wikipedia, so you could look at this in a list of decisions on civil rights, or decisions that consider the Equal Protection Clause of the US Constitution. So it becomes, with a bit of work, I'm just one contributor to the site, and other people are doing similar things. It goes from something that requires an intellectual threshold to understand to something more like an educational object, or something that's to support an educational process, something that exists in the web, and you can, as with Wikipedia, you go to it looking at one thing, and you end up with loads of other tabs looking at a concept you hadn't heard of, trying to create that process with civil rights legislation. But that was just one example. What I've spent a lot more time on is women's rights texts of the 17th and 18th century and the beginnings of what we now call feminism. So, for example, in JISC historic texts, I found page scans of this poem by John Duncan, and he's arguing that women can achieve greatness given the opportunity in the same way as men, and he cites women he thinks are great poets or great writers. But it's cryptic who he's referring to, because he's referring to people by pseudonyms, things that would be obvious to his audience in the mid-18th century, but baffling now. So it took a bit of research. He's got explanatory notes. Sometimes it's obvious, sometimes I had to consult modern scholarship to see who he's talking about, and often there wasn't information about these people on Wikisource or maybe on Wikipedia, but I can make links. So I created a bunch of these profiles on Wikisource for some of these authors that Duncan praises up. And so they give when this person lived, what they're known by, what they're famous for. If there's a Wikipedia link to that, if there's other sources of biographical information about this person, give that the context. And Duncan mentions this poet as doing two particularly beautiful poems, and on Internet Archive I found a book with that poem in, again in the form of page scans. If something exists but it's on the web as page scans, images of pages, then it's not searchable, it's not fun, you haven't got the verified text of it, it's kind of invisible. So I transcribed that poem. And that's in its entirety. It's not a great amount of work, but that encourages another level of engagement with this Duncan poem. So you can look at that and in a formal or informal learning setting, ask why did he choose this as a particularly beautiful poem, and so on. Oh, one of the poets ended up as Susanna Duncan. He married one of the poets he praised, which casts doubt on his motives for the whole exercise. So I'm kind of moving up the Bloom taxonomy from spreading factual knowledge and background to this poem to enabling people to with this method, we could build an 18th century web. These authors pay tribute to each other, cite each other, pay tribute to each other, and these could become actual links. So in one link you're taken to the thing they're talking about, or you're taken to background information about it. I've forgotten here. Also includes authority files from libraries, so we're identifying a particular person, not just, they're not confused with other people with a similar name. The links have to work both ways, otherwise it's just promoting inequality, because the obscure poets will cite the grand poets and not vice versa. Fortunately, Wikipedia and related sites have this "What links here" button. So if I go to Pope's Essay on Man, which is one of the most famous poems of this era, what comes up on What Links Here includes one of the poems I transcribed, which is Mary Leopold's line-for-line parody. So you can find, you can navigate through the web of information both ways and find maybe obscure stuff. So that's learning. I've learned a lot from that process, and I hope I'm lowering the threshold of effort and resource required for someone else to run a formal course or to learn themselves about this particular topic. How many minutes have I got? Okay, very quickly, I just want to point you to this where more... there's another Wikipedia sister site called Wikibooks. Wikipedia is an encyclopedia. That's very constraining in the type of material, in the style, and the referencing that you can have. Wikibooks is a lesser known, it's much more free, so its mission is educational material, and it's educational material at every level. So people are working on everything from preschool learning materials for counting small numbers up to postdoctoral how-tos on how to do genome sequencing in biology. And I'll direct you to one example. This is great. This is a set of cases and ideas in professional ethics. This is student-made stuff. So students in engineering at the University of Virginia have taken a professional ethics course, and they have to write a case study applying the concepts and theory from their course to a big something in the news. So Edward Snowden was unprofessional in he did what his paying employer wanted him not to do, but in a sense he was professional in that he lived the values that his organisation aspires to. And it's loads of things you've heard of, like the phone hacking scandal, or things that have been big news, but just not big news for us in the West. So they take a properly global approach. Yeah, I recommend to you, it's not all professional quality. Some of it's really good, some of it's okay, some of it's a bit ropey, and some of these case studies didn't get very far. And that's good. It means it's a challenging assignment, and it's clear what grade the students have to get from it. In the open education movement, we'd like to create huge volumes of freely reusable educational material across all subjects and levels. We'd also like to involve students in the process of deciding what's knowledge, and the process of publication, and the process of using research resources and summarising them. And in the context of this sort of community, those problems solve each other. And that's it. Oh, thank you. That's an ideal question. So, yeah, I'm doing... I'll be taking part in the Meet the Wikipedian session over lunch, but immediately after that, I'm doing a sort of training session in how to put stuff on Wikisource and and how we run Wikisource events. So I did a Women in Science Wikisource event where we published papers by female scientists who didn't have electronically findable papers. Phil?
Martin, you mentioned at the end, too briefly, the idea of students creating wikibooks. Could you compare that to students editing Wikipedia pages? What are the sort of strengths and weaknesses of the two?
Okay, so as I mentioned at the start, I'm a fan of Wikipedia educational assignments. Wikipedia is very constrained. For example, any fact is supposed to have a citation and an inline citation, and it's supposed to be an encyclopedic descriptive style of text which isn't instructional. So there's a lot of kind of text and exercises that you just can't have in Wikipedia just because of the mission of the site. Wikibooks is broader. You don't have to cite everything you put in. You're just required that what you're writing reflects a mainstream academic view. So you couldn't put a Wikibook about your conspiracy theory. So you've got to have some citations. But it's much more open in the style you can write and what you can particularly, what you can recommend that the user do things. You can kind of set assignments. Or you can analyse from a particular point of view, like analysing in terms of the theory of professionalism or the theory of corporate error.
So, sorry, can I follow up?
Oh, yeah, please do.
One of the restrictions within Wikipedia is that it's one article per subject. So, in Wikibooks, could you say, ask your class to create a book that about a subject that already exists?
That's a really good point, yeah. So you can create. It's organised by subject, but it doesn't have that kind of atomism that Wikipedia has, and you could have the same topic treated from different perspectives in the context of different books. Not just the educational level, but yes, maybe your interest is in the theory of professionalism. Both Wikibooks and Wikipedia exist for their purpose of creating particular resources and don't exist primarily to support educational projects. But again, that's kind of an advantage, and you've got to fit what the students are doing and give it a raison d'etre that goes beyond the course, which I thought that example was good, that it's not just what we learnt in this year, but it's a growing resource of case studies on this topic. So it's open in just the same sense. These other projects, so there's 11 Wikimedia projects in total, and they run on the same login system. So if you've got a Wikipedia login account, you've got a Wikisource and a Wikibooks account, and it's the same process of you have an edit button and you can make changes. And in theory, anybody can make changes, but there are cultural standards about what you can. So like I said, you can add links or even annotations to a Wikisource text that are useful, but you can't editorialize and put your own opinions in links and annotations.
Thank you for
I think that's it. Thanks a lot.
welcome our third presenter.
So while Brian's setting up, my name's Graham Potter. I work at the University of Northern British Columbia. Brian works at Thompson Rivers University, and we in the last few months have been working on ways that we might be able to flex some enterprise architecture to the services of open source applications as well as OER. So our approach has been not simply to collaborate on OER, but to collaborate on the infrastructure itself and bundle the platform with the content. So over to Brian.
So yeah, and just by the way, all the materials here are on an Etherpad document, which should allow for live editing. There's a bit.ly link at the top. I'm about to tweet out the URL for it.
So if you'll notice on the if you with your devices, if you hit that link at the top, there's you'll see all the members up in the top right corner, and there's a chat. So if you want to chat amongst yourselves using that little chat, go for it.
When you join for the first time, you'll be prompted to log in or come in anonymously. If we haven't already given you an account on our server, and I don't think we have very many of you, take the anonymous option. So there's kind of two components to what we're about. The first part that I'm going to handle, I'm going to try to handle quickly because I think the part Grant's going to talk about is far more interesting. But first of all is how we came to be. We kind of have a problem that I think a lot of particularly smaller institutions run into, where there's like one or two people that are interested in doing things outside the VLE, one or two people that are interested in doing stuff that's a little bit different. You probably run a WordPress installation, you don't really know what you're doing, you find yourself bugging the people who Reclaim Hosting a lot, trying to figure out why your system keeps crashing, and you feel a little bit less than confident putting courses and putting really vital student stuff in these environments because you're kind of doing this held together by duct tape and baling wire. So what we really felt like we needed to do was a group of us, we kind of realized we were all in the same position, and we decided to essentially pool our efforts. And we don't really we've kind of started to become quasi-official. BC Campus, which does open textbook stuff and other educational stuff, has started to come in and play in something of a more official role. We have a relationship with BCNet for infrastructure. But for the most part, we really do run in a very informal, very direct kind of way, which has, I think, allowed us to move really quickly. In terms of practical stuff, I just want to give a really brief update of a project I think I conceptually described at this conference last year. Jim referred to this in his his keynote this morning. As you can see, we haven't really quite figured out what the acronym means yet. We're just kind of running that script until we come up with one we like. But the essential idea of the Splot tools was, what I was realizing was, when we would get someone like Jim might come in and give a keynote and get everyone really excited, like, yeah, I'm going to get on the open web, I'm going to share my stuff, and I'm going to be part of this. And then maybe you get your first WordPress space, or you get a group of professors into their first WordPress space, and what do they get? They get a blank, templated site with no personality to it. It says, hello world. They don't know the difference between a page and a post. They don't know the difference between a tag. And even when you're doing just the basic introductory workshops, you're putting all this energy and time just to get people oriented to the point where they can put up their first post. And what we were finding was we were just losing so many people in that space. The other issue we have in British Columbia is we have very, very strict privacy laws in terms of what kind of information we can collect from our students. So even having a student account inside WordPress where we're collecting their email address is, by, I think, a ridiculous definition, but by some definitions at some institutions in our province, troublesome in terms of student privacy. So the idea of these types of tools, and the ones you're seeing here, these were mostly built by Alan Levine. The idea for each of these tools was to create the simplest possible environment for getting people stuff online that doesn't require a login. So if you look at, say, the TRU Writer Space, which is a very simple writing tool, literally you just click a button that says write, and through some mojo that Alan Levine has embedded into the theme, a little kind of secret one-time only login is generated for this usage. Now obviously if you don't want just anyone to come into your space, you can create a very simple code word that you just share with your class. Or you can enable moderation as well, so that there's some sort of gatekeeping function. Although I gotta say, we've been having this sucker wide open since we launched it, and we've yet to have a malicious post come up, and it's mostly just been cool things. But you can see, this is the WordPress interface. So this is the first thing people see when they come to write. And they're asked their title, they don't have to provide their name, they're given the basic WordPress authoring interface. One of the things we learned is you can actually take a formatted Word document and paste it into, copy and paste it into the interface. It'll maintain all the Word formatting, including footnotes. So we've been able to very, very quickly create online journals using this interface and upload header images. You have the option of providing an email address if you want a secret link sent to you that would allow you to go back and edit your work later. I mean, that's one of the issues we came up with, this no login, no account issue, was occasionally people go, well, I want to go back and change my work now, but because we didn't have a connection, that was an issue. So we did add that little feature. You choose whatever license you want, and that's the way it goes. And I could show more, but I guess the thing that's just been so encouraging, this is an example from Grant's University, a biology course, is it's just resulted, this is from a course in 20th century law at Thompson Rivers University. It's resulted in a huge increase in adoption of open web publishing at my institution. It's reduced resistance incredibly. It's almost dead easy to support. There's once you hand this over to people, there's no need for workshops and things like that. It's a tool they intuitively know how to use right away. This is a variation on this for images. So if you want to create your own little mini Flickr for a defined group that you run, we also have it. And also it's a very simple posting interface that does not require accounts or logins. And just one other thing before I hand things over, this concept of cloning, which I know there's a lot of ways of doing this, and for people who do stuff with VM, this may seem like old hat. But again, if you're at an institution and you're trying to support cool, interesting open web applications, and you want to avoid that abyss of the hello world, what do I do next phase, having a set of mostly configured, mostly set up, ready to run web spaces, and using a tool like NS Cloner allows you to hand something over to somebody where 80% of that kind of grunt legwork to get that space to where you want it to be can be done for somebody. It also would allow you to embed content within the site. So we might do something like build out an e-portfolio site, but with generic materials, but with each section, actually include the directions of what you might want to put in your publication section, what you might want to put inside your personal reflection section, things like that. So it's been incredibly exciting. But now I think I'm going to hand over to Grant, because that concept of cloning applications, moving things on, I think goes into a much wider direction with some of the work you've been doing.
So some months ago, maybe 9 months ago, the province of British Columbia had made an offer. They said the offer was something called EduCloud. And it was targeted mostly towards enterprise applications. So do you have some sort of email services, or do you have some enterprise software you want to run? We have free virtual machines. We're handing them out. You don't have to pay for them. I thought, well, that's really interesting. I wonder how we could actually run a wide array of open source software. There's lots of folks that I know in British Columbia that are interested in using those applications, but they might not necessarily have the support within their IT departments or have the skill sets within their units. So we started looking at a couple different frameworks, and I'm going to show you, before I show you some of the frameworks we're working with and what they're capable of, I'm just going to point you to that little document again. You'll see I have a little spot here that says come explore with us. These are invitations to the server, so you can actually jump on there and start installing applications while I'm talking if you want to. I think there's 6 invitations. If somebody grabs an invitation, you'll say, sorry, this invitation is invalid, go to the next one. Go to the next one until you get one that works. So I'm going to scoot over here to show you what this framework is. So we have an app store with over 50 apps. Now, there's not our apps, those are open source apps that people that are working on this framework are maintaining. They're made available through the sandstorm.io, but you're also able to take, if you want to trim back the number of applications, you could say, let's say we have our top 10 applications that faculty are really interested in and it might be useful in classes. We can trim back our app store to just 10. So in this case, we have it wide open. So I'll just go in to show you an example. So here is Ghost, which is, if you're familiar with WordPress that Brian was talking about, Ghost is like a blogging platform, really simple, lightweight. So here's a course for Prog Rock 101. It's written in Markdown, so you have all of your text. You have your ability to view the live site. So you'll see it'll generate some kind of a nonsensical kind of a domain or URL here. So if I can scroll down, here's all of my my top 100 prog rock playlist that you must listen to. And if I wanted to, you'll see down here, let's say if you say, well, that's great, that's just static text content. What if you want to share that playlist? What if you have some audio files, some rich media that you want to share? You could say, well, I'm going to need another app for that. So I'm going to open up. That's all right, I've got music too. So I say I need something that I can make playlists with, and I need something that students together, we can all generate playlists for this course. So I bring up something called Groove Basin, and I link Groove Basin to that course outline. Wait a minute, I think we're going to need discussions. So I come back into the index, I'm going to need maybe, let's look for some discussions. Here's Node BB, it's a discussion forum, and you can see how quickly it loads up. So it's, well, I can take that, I can either run it separately as just a bunch of linked apps, or I can embed some of these applications in. It's just spawning here. I don't think I'll quite wait for it. It usually takes around 10-15 seconds to start up. So, so that's one example of how we could use those open source applications and provision them quickly and allow faculty and instructors some real freedom in how they're going to, what tools they're going to use, and how they're going to share content. So like, here's an example of some music. Let's think of a directory of files. Here's a reading package, let's say. I'm not exactly sure what's in this reading package, but this is an application called Davos. If anyone here uses Dropbox, and in British Columbia, they're kind of not enthusiastic about your use of these third-party cloud share, like file sharing tools. This is a very simple file sharing tool that syncs with the OwnCloud mobile client as well as the desktop client. You can share your reading list, and you can map this to a domain. So if I go, if I go to publishing, and I'll say if my course is at, I'm just going to use the prog101.ca. You could have reading.prog101.ca, and then make the A record and point your domain to that application. It is really quick. Time to live, maybe 2 minutes, like something like 2 to 3 minutes. So I'll just go through that example. So let's say if I'm going to go readings.prog.ca, there's my DNS record, and there's my there's my text and my A record entry. If you don't know what that means, it's like, what is this guy talking about? My text and A record. So that's basic domain management stuff. How to point a URL at a resource, at an online resource. So now. If I've got my Prog Rock 101 app, well, really nicely done. I've got all my music files. I've got my reading list. Now I have a colleague, maybe in an adjacent province or an adjacent country, that wants to teach this course. How do I share this with them? If you tried to share all that disparate content, they might not be able to manage that on their end. In this case, I can come up here to download backup. It downloads backup. That backup will contain a bunch of information as to what open source repositories are being used, all the dependencies. You share that with them, and they can install it. They get the applications, the linkages in between them, as well as the content. So you're not just sharing the content; you're sharing the infrastructure as well. So we already have that in use. We have 190 some people using it. Lots of positive feedback. A couple different applications are already in development. We have some alternatives to like Google services, like Spreadsheet, Etherpad that you saw earlier. We also have alternatives to analytics, like using Piwik, easy to install. Same thing, one click. So here's another thing we've been working on. Sometimes I'm running out of time. Okay, I'll take 2 minutes. Sometimes the application hasn't been developed for the Sandstorm framework. So we started exploring Docker Cloud using the BCNet infrastructure. So you can see here we're running 16 containers. All of these, some of these are databases, some of these are simple like PHP apps. But I want to go quickly to show you how easy this might be. Let's say if I'm looking for, I want to use, for some reason I want to use edX. I can come in here, and come in here, and I can, I'm not going to be able to run through the whole thing, I'm running out of time. But I can actually search a public index of all these different open source applications. I can say, I want to install on this node, and I want to this URL, and I click deploy, and there's all kinds of other different, parameters and things you can add. But within the span of 2 or 3 minutes, you can have that deployed at your URL of your choice. And one more thing before I'm done. We're working on a number of recipes that will allow us to share these with each other. So let's say if we come up with a really good recipe for WordPress, like for example, Brian was talking about splots. So if we want to be able to share a splot, so here's a splot host. This is hosted at the Docker Cloud and EduCloud. We can share this recipe. We say, except for you, for your virtual host, put in your domain that you want, point your A record at our server, and it will be deployed in 10 minutes. So we're looking for ways, hopefully, to take us out of the equation so that we don't have to provide the recipes. We can just share the way that you're going to connect to our resources, and then you can self-serve. So that's coming hopefully in the following year.
So just to sum it up on a level that someone as unintelligent as I can understand, I mean, we're creating a community where we're able to share actual functionality, tools, and stuff ready to run the way we think about sharing an open textbook to one another. That we're actually able to share the context and the tool and the environment and the recipes. It incredibly speeds up our development process. It dramatically drops the risk because of things like containerized hosting. If one of these nodes goes nuts and someone gets hacked, instead of it bringing down our whole thing, we just bring down the one little node and everybody else continues on their way. So it allows us to be way more open in terms of what we allow people to do. And I guess at the bottom of the Ethernet, I asked for questions, and we don't have time to really get into it, but what I really would hope, if any of you are interested in this stuff, what I want to know is, okay, we got this new power. How does this change how we think about what we do as educational technologists? As opposed to like having, okay, here, come to our VLE, here's our service, sign up, and now start doing your work inside of it. How does this change our role in terms of how we think about linking functionalities together and applications together?
So this document is open and editable. We have a couple questions there. Please ask us questions now, but if something comes to you later, put it in there because we're going to collect some feedback and help us move the projects forward.
Thank you for our presentation and quick questions.
So Brian, the answer to your question was a great one. How do you think it changes?
So yeah, well, I as someone who's been kind of forced to work with the VLE, you know, when somebody comes to me and says, "Well, I would love to use WordPress to deliver my content, but I need a discussion space where my students can talk, and I need privacy controls on that." And you can do this stuff in WordPress, but WordPress doesn't do it well, and I've been through that road. So now I can start thinking, well, okay, well, we can roll out a really great WordPress presentation template ready to roll. It's kind of optimized for course type deployments, like the ProgRock one that Grant just showed, and maybe link it up to Mattermost, which is a Slack, open source Slack clone for people who can have multi-channel private discussions and a far more fluid, interesting discussion space than anything you're going to find in any VLE that I'm aware of. And with the next step, we didn't get a really chance to work into it, is once we start to get our authentication protocols and the ability to wrap these things together inside containers and link those things together, then suddenly I've created a custom-made VLE with the best-in-breed tools that we know of. And once we've done it once, like, you know, or Grant's done it more likely, I can copy what he did and apply it in my space.
Further to mention that's something that we're working on. We're testing Shibboleth, so we're seeing people that are offering this server space to us are also offering a Canadian Access Federation access to allow us to share with this not only within the province but access to our platform across the country. but they're using their own institution's credentials. So we don't have to manage usernames and passwords. They use their own institution's usernames and passwords, right? So we hope we'll have that. We currently support Google OAuth 2, and then passwordless, tokenless login.
Okay, and if you have any other questions, and you can contact them. Thank you for your presentation.
Hey guys. Sorry, I'm wrestling with the cable here. Okay, so my name's Alan, first of all. I'm a student at Edinburgh Uni, 4th year computer science, and I'm here to talk to you guys about my honours project. The objective of which was to take historical documents concerning people living in and around Edinburgh about the turn of the 20th century and take them and make a searchable database out of them automatically. So, this is our starting point. At the moment, the National Library of Scotland has a lot of these post office directories, which was kind of like a yellow pages of the days gone by. They've got a lot of scanned pages and a lot of transcripts that have been done with optical character recognition. But the problem with this is it's not really searchable. What we have at the moment is either dumb transcripts or just straight up images. So we want to go from this to something like this, where you've got an actual database of people with all the information that the directory contains on them that's searchable and automatically derived, because obviously to go through it by hand and enter this data manually into a database is incredibly time consuming. So there's a few different ways to go about this. One of the ways we considered was just a dictionary approach, whereby we'd have a list of common words that appeared in these directories and map them to surname, forename, occupation, etc., etc. But a big problem with this approach was obviously ambiguity. So for instance, the name Cameron could be either a forename or a surname. The surname Smith could also be an occupation. So that approach was kind of ruled out because it would sort of involve manual moderation. The second approach that we looked at was a sort of pattern matching approach. Obviously this data is quite well laid out, it's quite, there is a structure. The problem here was discrepancies in format between different directories and also within directories. So as we can see here, in general, when a title is present, the forename isn't included, occupations aren't always included. Every record doesn't exactly follow the same format. So we needed a way of doing this that was flexible enough to deal with these discrepancies. So we decided to go for a machine learning approach. So machine learning is basically an approach to classification whereby we show the computer tons, to use a scientific word, lots of different examples of each class. So we'd show it lots of examples of surnames, lots of examples of forenames, etc., etc. So it can learn what each of these look like and then classify unseen words. So the way we do this is we want to build a mathematical model of this, and the way we do this is we take words and we represent them as what we call feature vectors. which is essentially a list of numbers. So examples are things like the word length, the number of digits, that was a good indicator of it being an address, for example. Things like that. There was also a dictionary lookup that we used and incorporated that into the feature vector. So one of the features was, does it appear in the dictionary as a surname or a forename, and so on and so forth. So I've included a little sort of toy example here to sort of introduce machine learning. So say we want to predict whether it will rain on any given day, and we've got 3 features for each day. We've got cloud coverage, temperature, and wind speed. So what we do is we basically show the system a bunch of features from rainy days, a bunch of features from non-rainy days, so it can kind of work out, right, a day that's got tons of cloud coverage, low wind speed, maybe a bit cold, that's likely to rain. Whereas one with 0 cloud coverage, it's very unlikely it's going to rain that day. So we used that approach for classifying the words in the transcripts from the documents into surname, forename, occupation, title, address. So that was the basic gist of what we were doing. So the reason why we did this was, as I mentioned before, it handled discrepancies in format very well. You know, the pattern approach and the dictionary approach were too rigid. It didn't handle ambiguity. It didn't handle format discrepancies. Excuse me. There's also the problem with the transcripts themselves. The technology is quite mature now, but a lot of these directories are like 150 years old. So obviously the quality of the print and the paper erodes over time. You know, it becomes more difficult to read, even for a person sometimes. So a machine learning approach was also taken to correct those errors, sort of by looking at, so that we had a list of possible words, and we looked at which of the words were most similar to any that didn't appear in the dictionary, and used that approach to correct errors. So this approach, it was quite accurate. We did measured accuracy by tags, so we had an accuracy for the surnames, accuracy for forenames, so on and so forth, and it was achieving between 70 and 95% accuracy. So like surnames and titles were extremely accurate. They were up in the 90s. Everything else was between 70 and 85%. So at the moment, it sort of serves as a proof of concept. You know, because of time constraints, it was an honours project. I had other courses on. I couldn't do as many experiments as I maybe would have liked to. I believe we can improve this with more experiments. So it's just something to bear in mind. So once we have the data, we're now faced with the idea of storing it. And this is when the idea of open data comes in. So we said we needed this, but is this necessarily the best way of storing it? I mean, this approach to storing data, it's very mature, it's very well understood, there's a lot of support for this kind of approach, but in terms of an open data perspective, it's not great, particularly because here there's a very rigid schema. So if we want to extend this data, you know, we're going to have a hard time doing that. We're going to have to essentially put in another field for every single record, which isn't great if perhaps we have a person of particular interest that we want to add extra data to. You know, say, I don't know, an author, say Walter Scott was in our data, and we wanted to then, you know, add his works to that. We don't want to add a column like of publications to everybody in the directory. It just doesn't make sense. So it's not exactly the most flexible way of doing it. That and linking these records to data and other databases is quite difficult. You know, it's just hard. It's kind of counterintuitive. This approach to databases sort of, they're meant to exist as their own unit. They're not aware of other data. But what we can do is, instead of thinking about this data in terms of rows and columns and tables, we can think of it in terms of subjects which is the whole record, in other words, the entity to which that record pertains. Predicates, which here would be the column titles, and values, which is, well, the value in a column for a particular record. And using this, we can store data as a graph rather than a table. So, say we have record number 146 in our database. I should explain here that the NLS colon, so the way this approach works, this is Resource Description Framework, or RDF. It's been mentioned a couple of times today already, so apologies if this is sounding a bit familiar. But yeah, what we have here, that's sort of shorthand for a URL. So subjects and predicates are always URLs that point to either the resource, the entity in question, or in the case of predicates, it points to information on what values this can go from, what values this can go to, so on and so forth. So that there's a sort of a lot more flexible schemata for this approach. It's just a case of having a URL describing whatever it is you want and then using it, essentially. So we've got record 146 there. So we can store the surname there, Smith, the job, they were a nurse, whoever they were, and they lived on the Cowgate. So we can see here already, if we wanted to add publications, if this was Walter Scott, for example, if we wanted to add publications, it's just a case of adding another connection to another node. In this case, the node would be, one of his publications, perhaps in a database of books or whatever. So the example we went for here, and this is what we use in the system, we geocoded all of the addresses. So here we have another domain, geo, could be GeoNames or OpenStreetMap or anything like that. We've got the latitude and longitude there of that address, which exists in another database entirely. But we can see there, we can link across them with relative ease. So the benefits of this project are largely to open up this data. Well, these things aren't maybe necessarily directly an educational resource, they are kind of linked, and for history students doing research and everything, they don't want to get bogged down in reading through page after page after page of their old directories when there could be a searchable online resource which takes that away from them and they can concentrate on actually doing history. So it provides an open source tool for exploring Scotland's history in this way. And while this is limited to post office directories, and in particular, it's kind of only limited to ones in Edinburgh, the hope is that this can serve as a springboard for similar projects, not just making this data available, but also easy to access, easy to search, and easy to use. And also, I personally believe that this project's a good example of what can happen when we take the expertise of, at the National Library of Scotland and combine them with, my own expertise as a computer scientist. It demonstrates the benefit of opening your data, because a lot of this data, depending on the institution, is quite jealously guarded for the sake of losing potential revenue streams, things like that. I suppose open data doesn't really go hand in hand with monetization, but it serves to demonstrate the kind of thing that can be achieved if data is made open. Thank you. I should mention that the repository for the project is on my GitHub. If you want to go and check it out, play around with it, that's there.
Do we have 10 minutes? Any questions?
I know people on the spot, that was a great talk, and it's a really interesting project. I guess my question for you would be, what do you think could be done with a resource like this with a group of other students in an institution? So if you were to take, you said it's got some merits in an open data project, what kind of project do you think would be help to students? How could we bring together people like yourself and history students, and what kind of event would be attractive and learning opportunities?
Well, I mean, at the moment, like, the important thing to remember is that this project is kind of just a proof of concept at the moment rather than a finished end product. But the hope is that, you know, this will sort of help history students directly, but, you know, that there's no reason why this same approach couldn't be applied to other areas. So it's really about creating a tool for students to use and for researchers, rather than a sort of symbiotic relationship. It is very much focused on creating a product for them, a service, a tool. No?
Okay, thanks again.
Thanks, guys.
Okay, and thank all the presenters and the audience. And we finished a little bit early, and then